At 10:47 p.m. on July 4th, 1942, Captain Lieutenant Walter Leonhardt was at the periscope of the U-995, watching the largest Allied convoy he had ever seen cross the freezing waters of the Barents Sea. There were 35 merchant ships loaded with tanks, planes, and vital supplies for the Soviet Union. The problem was that Leonhardt had only 12 torpedoes left, and his chances of survival were practically zero. Convoy PQ-17 was the most heavily protected in history up to that point. 6 destroyers for corvettes, 3 minesweepers for anti-aircraft ships, 2 submarines, and 2 cruisers. The Allies were absolutely certain that no German submarine would dare approach. But they didn't know the U-995. Nicknamed the Secret Sharp by the Germans themselves due to its silent attack profile, the U-995 was a Type VIC submarine considered obsolete by the Kriegsmarine itself. His superiors mocked it, saying it was too small, too slow, and that Leonhardt was too cautious to cause real damage. But on that July night, in the most dangerous waters in the world, the Secret Shark would prove that underestimation is the deadliest weapon of all. Leonhardt adjusted the periscope. 3 torpedoes. The first hit the SS William Hooper Square in the engine room. The 7,000-ton ship broke in half and sank in less than 4 minutes, taking 300 tons of ammunition for the Russian front with it. What happened over the next 72 hours would become one of the greatest Allied naval disasters of World War II and one of the deadliest operations by a single submarine in history. Because the U-995 was not alone. But no one knew he was the bait. The story of PQ-17 had begun 3 weeks earlier, in June 1942, in the offices of the British Admiralty in London. Winston Churchill was under brutal pressure from Stalin, who demanded that the Allies open a second front in Europe. Since this was impossible at the time, the alternative was to send massive supplies to the Soviet Union via the Arctic route, the most dangerous route in the world. The convoys needed to sail north of Norway, passing just 300 miles from the German naval base in Trondheim, where the Tirpitz, the most powerful German battleship, was anchored. A 42,000-ton monster with 15-inch guns that could destroy an entire convoy alone. Convoy PQ-17 gathered 35 merchant ships loaded with 297 planes, 594 tanks, 4,246 trucks, and 156,000 tons of general supplies. The strategic value was inestimable. Losing PQ-17 would mean leaving Stalingrad without critical reinforcements. The convoy left Reykjavik, Iceland, on June 27, 1942, under the command of Commodore John Dowding. The escort was massive, but there was a fundamental problem. The Allies knew the Tirpitz was in Trondheim, but they didn't know if it would come out to intercept the convoy. The British Admiralty created a risky plan. If the Tirpitz came out, the close escort was to disperse immediately, and the merchant ships were to proceed alone to Soviet ports, while a cruiser force would try to intercept the German battleship. It was a desperate plan, and it was about to become a massacre. At Kriegsmarine headquarters in Berlin, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz was watching intelligence reports on PQ-17 with growing interest. He knew the Tirpitz was the most valuable card, but he also knew using it was too risky. If the Tirpitz were damaged or sunk, Germany would lose its only naval deterrent against the Royal Navy. So Donitz had a brilliant and brutal idea. He didn't need to use the Tirpitz. He just needed to make the Allies believe the Tirpitz was coming. And for that, he would use his submarines as bait. Among them was the U-995. Walter Leonhardt was 28 years old and was considered by his colleagues to be excessively cautious. He preferred long-distance night attacks, avoiding direct confrontations. Other U-boat commanders called him Ghost, because he was rarely detected. But this caution came at a price. His confirmed sinkings were low, and he was under pressure to prove his worth. The U-995 left Trondheim on July 1, 1942, with specific orders: locate PQ-17, report its exact position, and attack only if absolutely certain of success. It was a reconnaissance mission, not one of destruction. On July 2nd, the U-995 made the first visual contact with PQ-17 300 miles north of Bear Island. Leon Hart transmitted the position by radio, knowing the transmission would be intercepted by the British. That was exactly what Donitz wanted, to let the Allies know the U-boats were hunting. And then wait. On July 4th at 9 p.m., the British Admiralty in London received an intelligence report that would change everything. The Tirpitz had left Trondheim. The information was wrong. The Tirpitz had only moved to a nearby fjord for machinery tests, but the Admiralty didn't know that. They believed the German battleship was on its way to PQ-17. At 9:23 p.m., the most disastrous order of the naval war was sent. Convoy must disperse immediately and proceed to Russian ports separately. Commodore Dowding read the message in shock. Dispersing meant the merchant ships would be completely vulnerable to U-boats and a Luftwaffe. But orders were clear. At 10 p.m., PQ-17 dispersed. It was at that moment that the U-995 attacked. Leon Hart watched through the periscope as 35 ships separated in all directions, like sheep without a shepherd. He couldn't believe his luck. The secret shark dove to 40 meters and began to hunt. His first target was the SS William Hooper, an American Liberty ship loaded with 1,000 tons of ammunition. Leon Hart fired a single torpedo from 800 meters away. The G7E electric torpedo was silent and left little wake in the water. The William Hooper stood no chance. The explosion broke the ship in half, and it sank in 4 minutes. The second target was the SS Navarino, a British freighter with 500 tons of explosives. Leon Hart fired 2 torpedoes. The first missed, but the second hit the stern. The explosion was so violent it lit up the Arctic sky for miles. The Navarino exploded completely, killing the entire crew of 47 men instantly. Leon Hart dove to 60 meters and waited. He knew other U-boats were coming, and he was right. Over the next 12 hours, 8 more German U-boats converged on the area of the dispersed PQ-17. Among them were the U-334, U-88, and U-456. But the U-995 already had the advantage. Leon Hart had identified the escape route of the merchant ships and positioned his submarine exactly in their path. At 3 a.m. on July 5th, the U-995 sank the SS Peter Kerr, an American freighter with 300 tons of Sherman tanks. At 7:30 a.m., he sank the SS Hoosier, another Liberty ship, this time loaded with locomotives for the Soviet railways. The U-995 was on a silent rampage. But Leon Hart had a problem. He was running out of torpedoes. He had started the mission with 14 torpedoes. Now he had only 8, and there were still more than 20 merchant ships dispersed across the Barents Sea. Leon Hart made a risky decision. He surfaced the submarine, exposing himself completely, and used the 88mm deck gun to attack smaller ships. At 2 p.m. on July 5th, the U-995 sank the SS Ulston, a small British freighter, using only artillery fire. The crew of the Ulston tried to respond with a .303 Lewis machine gun, but it was useless against a submarine. The Ulston sank in 30 minutes. Leon Hart dove again, but he made a mistake. He had stayed surface for too long, and a Royal Air Force PBY Catalina spotted him. The plane dropped 4 depth charges, but the U-995 was already 80 meters deep. The explosions shook the hull, broke light bulbs, and damaged the hydraulic system, but the submarine survived. Leon Hart ordered absolute silence. For 6 hours, the U-995 remained motionless on the seabed while British destroyers searched the area with sonar. But the Type VIC was small and hard to detect. Eventually, the destroyers gave up. At 2 a.m. on July 6th, the U-995 returned to the surface and resumed the hunt. Over the next 2 days, the massacre continued. The U-995 sank the SS Alcoa Ranger, the SS Fairfield City, and the SS Daniel Morgan. Each sinking was meticulously recorded in Leon Hart's logbook. He wasn't just sinking ships. He was destroying the Soviet industrial capacity to resist the Wehrmacht. By July 7th, Leonhardt had only 2 torpedoes left. He decided to save them for high-value targets. At 6 p.m., he spotted the SS Alapana, a large 6,000-ton American freighter loaded with 2,000 tons of medical supplies and armored vehicles. It was the perfect target. Leonhardt fired his last 2 torpedoes from 1,200 meters. Both hit. The Alapana sank in 8 minutes, taking with it supplies that could have saved thousands of wounded Soviet soldiers. With his torpedoes exhausted, Leonhardt received orders to return to Trondheim. But he made a final and audacious decision. He used the deck gun to sink 3 more small freighters, the SS Bolton Castle, the SS El Capitan, and the SS Paulus Potter. When the U-995 finally reached Trondheim on July 10, 1942, Leonhardt had sunk 12 Allied merchant ships. Alone, it was the individual record for a single submarine on a single patrol on the Arctic route. But the true catastrophe of PQ-17 was even greater. In total, 24 of the 35 ships in the convoy were sunk. Of the 156,000 tons of cargo, 99,000 tons were lost, including 210 planes and 430 tanks. It was the greatest disaster of an Allied convoy in the entire Second World War. And all because the British Admiralty believed the Tirpitz was coming. But the Tirpitz never left Trondheim. Karl Donitz had won without firing a single shot from his battleship. He simply made the Allies believe the Tirpitz was on its way, and the U-boats did the rest. Walter Leonhardt was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross in August 1942, but he did not feel like a hero. In a letter to his wife, he wrote, "I sank ships. I killed men, but there was no glory in it. Just cold water, twisted metal, and screams you never forget." Leonhardt survived the war. The U-995 did too. In fact, the U-995 became the only Type VIIC submarine to survive World War II intact. After the war, it was handed over to Norway as reparations, served in the Royal Norwegian Navy until 1965, and was then returned to Germany. Today, the U-995 is preserved as a museum in Lebow, near Kiel, Germany. It is the only fully intact Type VIIC U-boat you can visit. But the story of PQ-17 left deep scars. Commodore Dowding never psychologically recovered from the disaster and died in 1944. Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, who gave the order to disperse the convoy, resigned in 1943 and died a few months later. The decision to disperse PQ-17 is still considered one of the worst naval tactical decisions in modern history, because it was not based on solid intelligence. It was based on fear, and fear is the most effective weapon of all. The Soviets never forgave the British for PQ-17. Stalin accused Churchill of deliberate sabotage, and trust between the Allies was severely shaken. The Arctic convoys continued until 1945, but never again with the same level of risk. The Arctic route killed more than 3,000 Allied sailors during the war. It is one of the least known and most brutal naval campaigns of the Second World War. But the legacy of the U-995 goes beyond numbers. It proved that a single submarine, well commanded, could change the course of an entire battle. And that underestimation is the most dangerous weapon of all. Leonhardt was not the most aggressive commander. He was not the most daring. But he was meticulous, patient, and deadly. And that made all the difference. After the war, Leonhardt became a naval engineer and worked on the reconstruction of the West German Navy. He rarely spoke about the war. In a 1982 interview, he said, "People call me a hero, but I only did what I was told to do. And I lived with that every day since." Walter Leonhardt died in 1990 at age 76. He never returned to visit the U-995. He said he didn't want to remember. But his story reminds us of something crucial about war. It is not always the strongest, the fastest, or the most technologically advanced who win. Sometimes it is the most patient, the most calculating, those who wait for the right moment, and those who never underestimate the power of a single man with a clear mission and the determination to fulfill it. The Secret Shark was not the most feared submarine of the Kriegsmarine, but in July 1942, it was the deadliest, and PQ-17 paid the price.